All right, let's talk about one of the most powerful and honestly most misunderstood forces in the entire global economy, the US dollar. On the surface, it seems simple enough, right? But its role on the world stage actually forces America into a set of what you could call impossible choices.
You know, this quote really hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures the paradox we're about to get into. You hear it all the time, this desire for a weaker dollar. But the real price to make that happen, well, it might be way higher than anyone's actually willing to pay. So where do we start? Well, let's begin with the goal you hear from politicians constantly. It's a classic stump speech, and let's be fair, on the surface it sounds like a fantastic plan for the country.
And the goal seems totally intuitive. The thinking goes like this. If you weaken the dollar, American-made stuff becomes a total bargain for the rest of the world. In theory, that should fire up our exports, shrink that pesky trade deficit, and bring all those manufacturing jobs roaring back. Sounds like a perfect plan, right?
Okay, but now we've got to dive a little deeper, because there's kind of this hidden rulebook that makes this whole wish list incredibly hard to pull off. It's a fundamental constraint on America's economic power that most people just don't see.
And this is the critical question you have to ask yourself. What if getting all of those popular goals at the exact same time isn't just difficult, but actually impossible, based on the simple mechanics of how global money works?
This brings us to the core of the problem, what economists call the Dollar Trilemma. I want you to think of these three goals as the corners of a triangle. Now, the United States can have any two of them, but it is fundamentally impossible to have all three at once. Trying to grab that third corner is what breaks the whole system.
To really get why this choice is so incredibly hard, we have to look at what's at stake with that first option on the triangle, the enormous, massive privilege of having the world's reserve currency.
For starters, just look at the money. The U.S. government saves up to 150 times billion dollars every single year just in lower borrowing costs. Think about that. Because everyone on the planet wants to buy U.S. debt, America gets to borrow money way more cheaply than pretty much anyone else. And that's not all. On top of that, you've got tens of billions more in pure profit from something called seigniorage. This is basically the financial perk you get from being able to print the money that the rest of the world needs to do business and to save.
But honestly, the benefits go so far beyond just the cash. The dollar's status as the reserve currency gives the U.S. what are basically geopolitical superpowers. It means we can impose devastating sanctions, freeze the assets of our enemies, and basically control the plumbing of the entire global financial system. These are immense, immense powers.
So, okay, if the perks of being the reserve currency are that great, how does all this connect back to the trade deficit that we're always hearing about and worrying about? Well, there's a feedback loop at work here that most people completely miss.
It works just like a chain reaction. First, the world sees the U.S. as the safest place to park its cash, so capital floods in to buy our stocks and bonds. All of that huge demand for U.S. assets drives up the value of the dollar. And then, a strong dollar makes American exports more expensive and foreign imports cheaper, which, you guessed it, naturally widens the trade deficit.
And this, right here, is the light bulb moment. The trade deficit isn't some separate problem we need to go out and solve. No, it is the direct consequence of all that capital flowing into the United States. They are literally two sides of the very same coin.
So here's the crucial takeaway. We have to completely reframe how we think about the trade deficit. It's not a sign of economic weakness at all. In fact, it's a signal of the dollar's incredible strength and its dominance around the world. It is a byproduct of success.
Now, understanding this feedback loop is absolutely critical. Why? Because if you don't get it, you can end up trying to fix the problem in the wrong order, which can actually make things much, much worse.
And I mean it. In economics, and especially when you're talking about something this massive, the order of operations is everything. Which lever you decide to pull first determines whether you actually hit your goal or you completely sabotage it.
So let's look at the two different playbooks here. You've got the right way and the wrong way. The right way to get a weaker dollar is to make U.S. assets a little less attractive, maybe by lowering interest rates. The dollar falls first, and then the trade deficit adjusts over time. Now, the wrong way is to attack the trade deficit head-on with things like tariffs. Sure, that blocks imports, so fewer dollars leave the country, but global capital is still pouring in. You end up creating a dollar shortage, which actually pushes the dollar's value up, the literal opposite of what you wanted to do.
And this brings us right back to where we started. We're looking at that really appealing wish list and the fundamental choice America has to make
about what it actually values the most.
One of the sources for this piece used a term that I just love. It's called a macroeconomic fantasy menu. Think about it. It's like going to a restaurant and ordering a bunch of things that sound delicious on their own, but when you put them together on one plate, you get a completely inedible dish.
And this is that fantasy menu. It's what you hear politicians promise all the time, all of these things at once. But as we've just seen, the dollar trilemma makes this combination literally impossible. You simply cannot have the incredible privileges of being the world's reserve currency and also have a weak dollar and a tiny trade deficit. You have to pick.
And that leaves us with this final, really provocative question. It boils the entire trilemma down to its absolute core. Chasing a smaller trade deficit at all costs might sound great in a soundbite, but it directly threatens the very foundation of the dollar's global power. So, what's the real priority? That's the impossible choice at the very heart of the dollar trilemma.